So happy you could join us once again. We are joined, as always, by Greg Engert, beer director for the Neighborhood Restaurant Group, a food and wine sommelier of the year. The group includes Vermilion in Arlington, Eat Bar in Old Town. Greg, it is always good to see you.
Good to see you.
What is on tap this week?
So this week we have a beer from Prairie Artisan Ales out of Oklahoma. These are the Healy brothers, Chase and Colin Healy, started up Prairie Artisan Ales not too long ago at all. And Chase was actually previously brewing at Coop, which is a fantastic Oklahoma brewery, and one that has actually poured their beers at Savor, the event that we have in DC on most years. They make great beers as well. So Chase left, joined his brother Colin doing Prairie Artisan Ales. They're in an interesting position right now because they're a brewery that is brewing at another brewery, so to speak, so almost kind of this gypsy beer mentality at Krebs Brewing Company in Krebs, Oklahoma. That's where they are, but they are currently raising money to build their own brew house, small brew house in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So as we'll taste right now, great brewers are going to make great beer wherever they're making it. And Prairie concentrates on the farmhouse ale, the Saison style, but all of their beers are different. They have a different angle to them. So this is the kind of just the standard Prairie Ale, a Saison, mildly spiced with Saaz hops from the Czech Republic. Gives it a kind of black peppery quality in the nose. Fermented with a Saison yeast that gives us a little bit of grass, lemon, almost pineapple-y characteristics as well. And then finished with Brettanomyces, the semi-wild yeast strain that really, really does its magic here, giving it this kind of earthy, rustic, funky, barnyardy quality that is much more alluring than it might sound when I say it that way. Yeah, it's a fantastic, fantastic beer. They make a beer called Prairie Hop. That's kind of a hop-forward Saison. Prairie Standard, which is just a straight Saison, no wild yeast added, and many, many more. So if you see anything with the name Prairie on it in this beautiful labeling, grab it.
I like that a lot.
Really cool stuff. Chase is the brewmaster. Colin, his brother, is also a founder, but handles more of like the marketing and art direction and does a wonderful job as well. One thing before we taste, you'll notice it is almost has like a milky appearance to it. The beer is 100% unfiltered and re-fermented in the bottle. So there's a lot of yeast sediment that settles down to the bottom of the bottle. Yeast sediment will not hurt you at all. It can give a little bit more of a dry character to the beer. It might make things look a little bit creamy and milky, but is fantastic for the flavors because nothing has been removed. So all of the flavor, it's intense, therefore.
Telltale.
Brettanomyces.
Yep. Yeah. Very nice. That's good. It's got a different little twang to it than style. I mean, the similar styles we've had in the past. I'm not sure what that is. I mean, the citrus is really...
Citrus comes through, pops through. But you know what's cool, too, is like we should never mistake Brettanomyces for sour. This is not necessarily a sour beer at all. It's funky, it's rustic, it's old world and old school, but it's not tart. It's not lactic because it's just that Lactobacillus pediococcus or the major bacteria that can lend acidity to beer. Well, when something is just dosed with Brettanomyces like this, you shouldn't expect too much tartness or sour qualities. What you get more here is a kind of dry hop character that's not bitter, but it's drying. And that funk comes into the nose, but also onto the palate as well.
Now, not to put you on the spot, but do you know their inspiration? Are they lifelong residents of the state and discovered it at a small shop there, or?
Oh, yeah, they're definitely from. They're from. They're Oklahoma boys, and they are been huge into craft beer for a long time. Classic beer geeks. Chase being a brewer for some time, and lovers of farmhouse ales. They decided to put their spin on it. And it's cool, too, is like there is a modern American farmhouse ale community that's burgeoning. There are a number of breweries that almost exclusively make takes on the old school farmhouse ale style, Prairie being one. Tired Hands outside of Philadelphia makes a lot of hoppy beers, but tons of Saisons as well. Hill Farmstead in Vermont, many, many Saisons. Oxbow in Maine, Stillwater, our gypsy brewer, locally, St. Somewhere down in Florida. So there's this kind of burgeoning cadre of brewers that are really looking to experiment with the farmhouse ale style. Jester King in Texas does a lot as well with that. So I think they're kind of folding into that notion. Another thing that's really interesting that's happening today is some interesting changes in distribution and how brewers go about getting their beer where they get it. So it's pretty interesting that we're getting this very small batch, super tiny batches of farmhouse ales from Oklahoma in DC, but you'll see it all over the US in small batches. Now, it used to be impossible. If you're a brewery and you brew, a small amount of beer, you kind of concentrate in your home market because anytime you try to ship beer to a different market, the rates of shipping are extreme unless you have a lot of beer to send. And so to ship small amounts all over the country would make the beer, would price itself out. It'd be too expensive. So what's been happening is for these smaller brewers like Prairie or St. Somewhere, Stillwater, what they're doing instead is linking up with importers, American importers. So Shelton Brothers actually distributes this beer. So what they do is they can ship a bunch of Prairie beer to one place, to Shelton Brothers, which is in Belchertown, Massachusetts. And then Shelton Brothers is filling all these large orders to different distributors throughout the U.S. with their imports and with other, American-made beer, like the beers of Anchorage Brewing Company in Alaska. And so therefore now you can send a Shelton Brothers shipment down to DC that includes some Prairie beer, and the beer is not as expensive as it would be for them just to ship a few cases to DC or something like that.
What's not to love about that?
It's great. It does add a little bit more of a price increase just because there's 4 tiers now. Typically it's brewery, distributor, retailer. In this case, it's brewery, importer, distributor, retailer. But like I said, in order for us to get our hands on it, it's got to be done that way because it would be astronomically expensive with only the 3 tier. And I should mention too, Shelton Brothers are pretty restrained in their markup, so it's a nice price on this beer.
And I haven't seen this before, but they actually give some props to Shelton Brothers distributing right there on the label.
Yep, distributed by our friends at Shelton Brothers.
Exactly. They're obviously happy with the work they've done on their behalf.
Well, their portfolio is fantastic. If you see Shelton Brothers imports on a label, get it because it's going to be a great beer.
All right. What would you pair this with?
So, Saisons, we talk all the time about how great they are with food. I'm particularly enamored with the funk that I'm smelling here. And actually, I was mentioning before, I recently was out in Boulder, Colorado for a few days visiting my very close friends at Avery Brewing Company, one of the best American brewers out there. And was lucky enough to spend some time in Denver as well. And I went to a fantastic beer place in Denver called Euclid Hall. And it's not just about the beer there, it's a great restaurant. I mean, a great restaurant. I had lunch there. And I had a dish that I think would be amazing with this. It was, a classic kind of French Manila clams and merguez sausage in brodo, or in like a bouillon like broth. Fantastic, because you get this really nice little bit of like dry, peppery quality to balance the salt of the clams themselves. And then merguez sausage is typically lamb sausage. It's got a little bit of a rustic, funky quality to it. That's really delicious with Brettanomyces character that we find in the beer.
Really like that a lot. We've got a question for Greg this week from Kurt Spence. Kurt says he's been watching Beer of the Week. He's a beer novice. He says that he just had an occasional beer with dinner. And this is a wide open question, but I think you can point him in the right direction to start. He's wondering, how should I start to get the best out of beer?
It's a great question. I think that you should come to Church Key a lot, but we can help you here.
Definitely put that on your list. I would say that too.
I think getting into beer is a nice blend of the kind of the public and the private. I think you can get a lot done studying at home and tasting at home. And what we have today that we didn't have when I started getting into it is the internet and the amount of information that's available. What I always like to do is if I'm drinking a beer that I've never had before, is I like to go to the producer's website and see what they're saying about the beer after I've tasted it first, of course. Utilize cool rating sites like Rate Beer and Beer Advocate to see what people are saying about it. Not necessarily how they're rating it, but just to see what they're getting from it. Look at things like style and ingredients and do some research through the internet or through books on what these things should mean to the beer. And every beer you drink can be just a stepping stone in your education. A couple books that I think that everybody should have on hand for these kinds of things, just as general guides. One is called Tasting Beer by Randy Mosher, which is fantastic. Really just a great introduction to all things beer and flavor. And then also Brewmaster's Table from Garrett Oliver, the brewmaster of Brooklyn Brewery. And he's just got an amazing book on beer on its own, but also, of course, with food. And also Garrett did edit the first edition, of course, of the Oxford Companion to Beer, which is a little pricey, but a fantastic reference tome to have on hand. And it can answer most any question you could ever come up with for beer. So you start with those three books. Taste, and get out into the bars, the restaurants, the breweries. Visiting breweries is a fantastically fun thing, as we know. Go on tours. Pick the brain of the brewers and the salesmen and women who work there. Head out to bars and restaurants and engage your servers about the beer. And I think you can kind of really get a good footing that way.
I'm just guessing, and not to knock uber beer geeks, but I'm sure a lot of brewers are sometimes really happy just to talk to someone who doesn't know anything about it.
Oh, yeah.
And they like talking to beer geeks too.
Totally. Well, I think it's funny because, I think there's definitely, brewers tend to be pretty psyched to talk to most anybody, which is awesome. I think that's one of the hallmarks of the craft community is the outreach and the sociability of it. But I think it is, I think to your point, don't worry if you feel like you don't know anything or that much about beer. If you're meeting somebody who does, because I think brewers, myself, I love meeting people who are like, I'm really new to beer, but I think I love it. How can I love it more? That is exciting for people like me, to really get you going and to lead you on a path that we've gone down very happily.
I've been practicing a long time, and I really don't know that much at all. I'm lucky to sit with this guy every few weeks. So, Kurt, thanks for the email. Hope that gets you started on your way. Don't hesitate to send another question back down the road. The email, if you'd like to ask Greg a question, is beeroftheweek@WTOP.com. Greg, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone, please always do drink responsibly, and be sure to bring your thirst next time for another Beer of the Week.